I'm a 34-year-old guy and my fiancée Sarah is 28. We've known each other for about 6 years and have been engaged for 1 year. Our wedding is just 2 weeks away, but something I witnessed recently has me questioning if I'm making a huge mistake. Tonight, Sarah and I were enjoying a rare moment of relaxation at home. She was in the kitchen preparing dinner while I was in the backyard working on one of my projects. I got thirsty from the physical labor, so I came back inside to grab a drink. That's when I saw Sarah at the counter, talking on speakerphone. I immediately recognized the voice as my brother-in-law, Marty. Now, here's where things start to get confusing. Marty had inquired Sarah about Evelyn's whereabouts, expressing his difficulty in reaching her through texts. Overhearing their conversation, I learned from Sarah that Evelyn had recently left our place and was expected to be home in about 30 minutes. As I moved to the kitchen, curiosity led me to ask Sarah about the nature of their discussion, to which she informed me that Marty had been seeking Evelyn. Observing my wife's actions later, I saw her engaged in texting. Upon asking, she informed me that her texts were directed to Evelyn on Marty's behalf. I then took a moment to absorb the situation, correlating various pieces of information. Firstly, Sarah had told Marty that Evelyn was at our place, a fact contradicting reality as Evelyn hadn't been here since she assisted with wedding decorations yesterday. Secondly, I found it peculiar that Sarah chose to text Evelyn despite Marty's previous unsuccessfulness in reaching her through texts. Lastly, a cloud of suspicion hovered over Sarah's assurance to Marty of Evelyn returning home within the next 30 minutes, making me ponder whether Sarah had knowledge of Evelyn's precise location. My mind became a battleground of numerous explanations revolving around Sarah's mysterious behavior. The possibility of Sarah disguising the truth from Marty regarding Evelyn's location seemed plausible. She might also be alerting Evelyn subtly to hasten her return home as per Marty's expectations. Engulfed in a whirlpool of thoughts, varying from reasonable to dreadful, I contemplated confronting Sarah despite uncertainties regarding the transparency of her response in case my suspicions held truth. This brings me to what happened about an hour ago. I woke up around 1 a.m. needing to use the bathroom, and I couldn't resist the temptation to check Sarah's phone. We both know each other's pins, so it wasn't hard to do. I grabbed my phone, went to the bathroom, unlocked it, and there it was, confirming my fears, and probably what most of you were anticipating. Sarah's sister, Evelyn, has been having an affair with a coworker for about 6 months, and Sarah has been actively helping Evelyn conceal it during that entire time. There are literally hundreds of texts between them discussing the affair, the coworker involved, and intimate details that are really embarrassing for my brother-in-law. It's all very unsettling. And here's my future wife, seemingly going along with it without any apparent remorse. I took screenshots of the entire conversation, returned the phone to where I found it, and then retreated to my home office to share this story on Reddit, just so I can avoid the primal scream that's building up inside me. At this moment, I'm in an incredibly difficult situation. Reddit, I can't go through with marrying Sarah. I simply can't. I can't think of any reasonable explanation she could give me for aiding her sister in this affair, causing harm not only to Marty, but also their 2-year-old daughter. On the flip side, both my family and Sarah's family have invested a substantial amount of money in the wedding scheduled to take place in roughly 2 weeks. There's no chance of us recovering any of that money. Additionally, I can't help but feel like a complete fool. How did I not see this side of her before? And what on earth should I do now? I absolutely cannot go through with marrying her, even though I still want to. She's beautiful, fun, and, well, I thought we had a promising future together. But, hold on. I have to interrupt you there. Kind? You think she's kind? Can a kind person assist a cheater, help cover up an affair, and disrupt a family that includes a 2-year-old child? No, that's not kindness at all. Anyway, she's never wronged me, but I'm struggling to see her in the same light at the moment. It's like a dark blemish on an otherwise beautiful painting. A few hours later, I posted an update. I got to the office around 7 a.m., and since no one else was there, I decided to address the situation head-on. I called my brother, who lives in Australia. He was still awake after putting his kids to bed. It was tough breaking the news to him, knowing that he had spent a significant amount on flights for him and his family to attend the wedding. Credit to my older brother, he didn't bring up that one time and instead supported me. He raised a valid point, too. He mentioned that my job involves dealing with liars and scammers regularly, so it's understandable that I'd want a partner I can trust completely. He was absolutely right about that. Now I understand why I had such a strong reaction to Sarah's involvement in this deception. He also had a fantastic idea. He planned to visit anyway, but instead of attending the wedding, they would go to Disney World. This way, my brother's kids would have me as their accompanying uncle. It should work out fine, since my wife and I were already planning to honeymoon in Florida and meet up with them. In any case, I'll adjust our plans to be closer to him and his family, and I'll offer Sarah's ticket to either my sister or another family member. Later, I'll post another update expressing my stress. I'll also mention that Marty is a teacher, which is tough because the life of a teacher is already challenging as it is. Update. I arrived at Marty's house a little past 10 a.m. He had just put his daughter down for a nap, and we had a lengthy, frankly tough conversation in the kitchen. Essentially, he had suspected this for a couple of months, but Evelyn had been quite adept at covering her tracks, likely with the help of my wife and a couple of their mutual friends. Regrettably, I don't possess all 6 months' worth of text messages, just a few dozen screenshots that I forwarded to myself from Sarah's phone. Nevertheless, I provided Marty with what I had and offered my assistance in any way possible. I work as a field analyst in an insurance company specializing in workers' compensation fraud, so I have some knowledge and connections. Right now, I'm working from my laptop in my soon-to-be brother-in-law's kitchen, trying to salvage whatever I can. I'll have to speak with Sarah this evening and inform my friends and family about the wedding cancellation as quickly as possible, now that I know I won't be causing harm to Marty. So far, I've managed to rebook most of the honeymoon, although I encountered an issue with the tickets because Sarah was flying under her maiden name, and our airline has a rule regarding surname changes. Nonetheless, they did permit me to cancel and receive a partial refund, allowing me to rebook for my sister, who will be joining her 2 brothers and nieces on a trip to Florida in a couple of weeks. I'm holding off on canceling the venues until after I talk to Sarah. I don't want to tip anyone off until Marty gets a chance to confront Evelyn. However, I will definitely inform my family and friends this afternoon and ask them to keep it confidential. Right now, I'm pretty much in a frenzy, canceling anything I can cancel. Soon, I'll have to go to the bank to open a new account and sort out my bills and payments. Some people in the comments have advised me to separate my finances, which should work out fine. The mortgage is in my name since we're not married, and I have the higher income. However, Sarah did contribute about $20,000 towards the down payment compared to my $60,000. I'll probably have to reimburse her for that amount and a portion of the mortgage payments for the last 16 months. But it could be worse. Update. It's around 8:30 p.m., and I'm writing this from my buddy Mark's house. Mark is a former co-worker of mine in the same field of work. For those who don't know, I work as a private detective, investigating potential fraudulent claims related to workers' compensation. Anyways, as I kind of hinted at, Marty asked for my help in finding out who the other guy was that Evelyn was cheating on him with. All we had to go on was the guy's name Jake. The first thing I did wasn't some major sleuthing. It was basically just going through LinkedIn, trying to find a guy through Evelyn's connections. But that brought up nothing, which I thought was strange. Marty had told me that Evelyn was supposed to go out for drinks tonight after work, and that she wouldn't be home until around 9 or 10. I told him that I would help, but that he needed to come with me. I then contacted my buddy Mark, explained the situation to him, and had him agree to meet us later that day. Marty is the brother-in-law, while Mark is my friend. Initially, we drove to Marty's parents' house so they could look after their granddaughter. I'm not sure what Marty told his parents because I stayed in the car during that time. Our next stop was Evelyn's workplace. Her workplace is one of those large commercial strip mall complexes with rows of nondescript offices and a big open parking lot. We circled around until we located Evelyn's car, and Marty used a spare set of keys to unlock it. I then provided Marty with a voice-activated recorder and a tracker to place inside the car. After that, we departed, parked a little down the street, and waited for my friend Mark to join us. We also waited for Evelyn to leave her workplace. Mark arrived about 20 minutes later, joined us in the car, and roughly an hour after that, Evelyn exited her office with 2 of her girlfriends and a tall, younger man with sandy blonde hair. It was obvious that Evelyn and this man were holding hands, which made things easier for me. I snapped a couple of photos from the car and then followed Evelyn as she left in her own car while tracking her movements. Initially, I thought she might head to a hotel or something, but she didn't. Instead, She drove to a reasonably nice bar and grill located in an upscale part of town, parking on the street. I drove past her as she got out of her car and entered the establishment. Then I found my own parking spot and reviewed the plan. Our first move was to send my friend Mark in. Since no one there knew him, he had two primary tasks. First, he was instructed to attempt to obtain any incriminating photographs of Evelyn and Jake. And second, to serve as my alibi. Marty and I remained in the car for approximately 20 minutes until I received the first set of text messages from Mark. These messages contained images of Evelyn and Jake engaged in romantic activities in front of their two female colleagues. Marty's suspicions were proven correct. It became clear that Evelyn's friends were actively assisting her in concealing the affair from Marty. Marty was visibly upset and angry. Apparently, one of the co-workers involved is married and both couples were close friends, with toddlers of similar ages. This post is quite a mess, folks. Oh my goodness. Anyway, I asked Marty if this evidence was sufficient for him, but he insisted on learning the identity of the other man. I tried to convince him that we could find out later, but he practically begged me, so I told him to wait. I messaged Mark to let him know I was coming in, and then I entered the bar myself. Upon entering, I spotted Evelyn and her group laughing and enjoying drinks at one of those tall circular tables near the front window. I paused for a moment upon entering, pretended to be surprised, and then greeted Evelyn. "Evelyn, hi, what are you doing here?" Her reaction was one of obvious shock, and the atmosphere around her immediately grew tense. Evelyn promptly introduced me as her sister's fiancé and mentioned that we were getting married in 2 weeks. Congratulations poured in from everyone, and I expressed my gratitude before extending my hand to the blonde guy and introducing myself with my full name, hoping he would reciprocate. To my surprise, he did, and I was a bit taken aback to learn that his name wasn't Jake. After introducing myself to the rest of the group, I informed Evelyn that I had come to meet a co-worker. I waved to Mark and then excused myself to join him. Once I reached Mark, I shared the guy's name with him. Subsequently, Mark and I both took out our phones and started our investigation. It didn't take us long to identify him, as he had active social media profiles and a couple of legal judgments against him. Things started to make sense when we discovered that Jake was his middle name. At this point, I was simply relieved that Evelyn wasn't involved with two different co-workers. It turned out that Jake was 26 years old, married, and had a 1-year-old daughter. This situation just keeps getting more complicated, or should I say worse. Anyway, I texted Marty the guy's name and decided to push my luck by asking him to wait a few more minutes. Essentially, I'm acting as a babysitter here at the bar, making sure I'm clearly visible to Evelyn and her group. I could tell from the corner of my eye that no one was particularly pleased with my presence, and it was putting a damper on their night. That was my intention. I allowed this to go on for about 10 more minutes before instructing Marty to send a text to Evelyn, letting her know he'd be spending the night at his parents' house with their daughter. It didn't take long after that for me to notice Evelyn taking out her phone, showing it to Jake, and then everyone deciding to call it a night. Evelyn approached me, bid me good night, and even invited Sarah and me over for dinner this weekend. I smiled and agreed, saying it sounded like a great idea, and wished her and her co-workers a pleasant evening. Mark and I waited for them to leave, settled our bill, and then rushed back to Marty, who was still waiting. There was some hesitation on our part because we weren't sure what Evelyn might do next. I half assumed she might have already booked a hotel room, which would have complicated things and limited my options. As it turns out, tonight was originally meant to be a casual night of drinks at the bar. It only escalated when Marty decided to spend the night at his parents' place. Evelyn immediately headed home, and we discreetly followed, parking down the street. It didn't take much longer for another car to pull into Marty's driveway. We watched as Jake got out, approached the door, knocked, and was welcomed by Evelyn. They entered the house together. By this point, it was around 7:30 p.m., and I had my own plans for the evening. As a friend, I felt like I'd already done everything I could for Marty. He seemed capable of handling the rest on his own. While I empathized with him, I didn't want to get any more deeply involved in this drama than I already was. Acting as his wingman while he confronted his cheating wife felt like too much, especially given my own situation. Marty understood and assured me he would handle the situation from there. It turns out Marty has more strength than Evelyn might have thought. He went to Evelyn's car, retrieved my equipment, and we said our goodbyes. That was nearly 2 hours ago. I did receive one text from Marty, letting me know that he had confronted Evelyn, and he was indeed going to his parents' house this time. However, my phone hasn't been buzzing with updates, so I'm not sure what's currently happening with Evelyn. I've been with Mark since then. I believe that pretty much wraps up my role in Marty's situation. If he followed my advice wisely, he might have been recording the events with his phone as he entered the house. I'll find out about that later. Anyway, my main concern right now is heading home and breaking the news to Sarah that the wedding is canceled. It's almost certain she'll take it very hard. There's no way around it. But as I mentioned, I simply can't go through with marrying her at this moment. I'm uncertain about our future and whether we'll remain in each other's lives or not, but one thing's for sure. We won't be getting married anytime soon. For those wondering why I didn't talk to my wife first or confront her, I have to say, are you folks not seeing the situation? She lied blatantly in front of me and her brother-in-law, someone she's known for about a decade, and whom she considers a great husband and father. Maybe some people believe that someone can lie so convincingly to someone they're supposed to care about and then suddenly tell the truth. But I'm not built that way. Until that moment, I had never had a reason to doubt or mistrust Sarah. However, she proved herself untrustworthy right before my eyes. So expecting her to be honest with me or letting it go simply doesn't make sense. It would have been incredibly simple for her to deceive me and then erase those text messages. If she had done that, I would have never come across the hurtful things she said, never witnessed her being so deceitful and two-faced, and never realized how little I truly knew about her. I'm heading home to have a conversation with Sarah. I'll provide an update later, but I don't anticipate it being a positive one. In the subsequent update, well, I did have that conversation with Sarah last night, and it was quite chaotic. Honestly, I'm mentally exhausted and still drained, even though I took another sick day and slept in until almost 10:45. I understand everyone's eagerness for updates, but as much as it helps me to write everything down, I'm just completely spent. Plus, as you might have noticed, I tend to be long-winded. You could say it's a character trait from my profession and the countless detailed reports I've had to write. In short, I returned home to discuss canceling the wedding with Sarah, and I found her consoling Evelyn on my couch. I almost turned around and walked out, but I stayed. We exchanged words. Tears were shed, tempers flared, and the police were called. Afterward, I collapsed and slept for about 10 hours, and now my phone is practically overheating from the multitude of unread messages and missed calls. Things are quite uncertain right now, and I have a busy day ahead. My family already got wind of the situation yesterday afternoon, but I need to reach out to some friends today and handle various other matters. In the subsequent update, there's a lot to discuss, and most of it, to be honest, hasn't been positive. It's been downright terrible, but I'll get into that. First, I left Mark's house quite late last night. Sarah knew I was discussing business with Mark, although she had no clue it was related to her sister's affair. However, it was getting late, and it was time to summon the courage to go home and confront her. After receiving some pep talks from Mark, I finally mustered the resolve, texted Sarah that I was on my way home, and left in my car. As mentioned in the last update, I was rather surprised when I arrived because, upon entering the house, I found Evelyn sitting on the couch, crying alongside Sarah. I hadn't noticed Evelyn's car in the driveway when I pulled in, so it was the last thing I expected. I hesitated for a moment and almost turned around to leave. This was not how I had envisioned this situation unfolding, and I knew that Evelyn's presence was only going to make an already bad situation much worse. I had a plan in mind that I wanted to follow. As I entered the room, both Sarah and Evelyn glanced at me and acknowledged my presence, but the barrage of accusations I anticipated didn't come. I simply returned their gaze, raising an eyebrow in question. The moment hung in the air briefly. Evelyn resumed crying, Sarah went back to consoling her, and I let the awkwardness linger for a few seconds. It seemed that Marty hadn't mentioned my involvement in uncovering Evelyn's affair, so I decided to act oblivious. I settled into a recliner, placed my laptop bag down, and took my phone out of my pocket. I pretended to fiddle with my phone and then asked them, "What's going on?" Evelyn continued crying, but Sarah looked at me and explained, "Marty is divorcing Evie." "What's the reason?" I inquired. Sarah paused her comforting for a moment and gave me a look. I could almost see her face contort, like the expression a 5-year-old makes when you tell them to eat their broccoli or finish their lima beans. Evelyn shot Sarah a glance that didn't require sibling telepathy to understand. Finally, Sarah confessed, she cheated on him. I have to admit, this response caught me completely off guard. It was definitely not what I had expected. Some of the more cynical readers might think, well, the secret was out, so there's no point in hiding it. Yeah, that's true. But it's equally true that she had the option to act like she didn't know or phrase it differently. For instance, Marty could have accused Evie of cheating instead of essentially confirming it to my face. Evelyn didn't take this news well. She slumped into the couch a bit, emitting a peculiar mix of a sigh and a sob simultaneously. I wanted to push further and get all the details, but I must have stumbled over my words a bit. Sarah probably perceived it as shock, and in a way she was right. Just not in the way she assumed. I inquired, "Did you know?" Sarah didn't say anything. She simply nodded, her hand still gently comforting her sister's shoulder. Without hesitation, I asked the obvious follow-up question, "How long?" Surprisingly, the answer came more readily than I expected. 6 months, she admitted. I was taken aback by how easily she confessed. Evelyn seemed shocked as well. She pushed her sister's hand off her, and I think even Sarah was a bit surprised to hear herself say it aloud. I leaned back in the recliner and rubbed my face. It was time to rip off the rest of the Band-Aid. "We're done," I stated firmly. "We're not getting married." Both sisters looked at me like stunned goats, and there were immediate expressions of confusion. "Huh? What?" came from both of them. I stood up and reiterated, "We're not getting married. I can't marry someone who would cover up infidelity, especially for 6 months." Sarah leaped off the couch and opened her arms in a gesture that said, "You can't be serious," but I held my hands up to signal my seriousness. I said, "I'm serious, I can't do this. I don't like the fact that she was involved in this, and I can't go through with the wedding feeling like this. It would be a mistake." The tears began immediately, and even Evelyn made a grimacing expression that resembled a fish trying to gulp air. Sarah burst into wails, accused me of not loving her, appealed to my sense of duty, mentioned the loss of money, the inconvenience to our friends, and the embarrassment of it all. Frankly, these were all things I had considered, but hearing them from Sarah while she was sobbing made it feel different. At this point, I probably made a major error. In an attempt to emphasize the finality of my decision, I blurted out, "I've already canceled the honeymoon. It's not happening." I knew it was a bomb the moment it left my mouth, and the explosion was nearly immediate. Evelyn, to her credit, had always been quick on the uptake, which probably contributed to her ability to deceive her husband for so long. I could practically see the realization dawning on her as she connected the dots. With my earlier appearance at the bar, she screamed, "You son of a witch!" and lunged at me across the room. Well, I'm not exactly a bodybuilder, but I'm not exactly a couch potato either. However, when Evelyn launched herself at me for the 4th time, I was totally caught off guard. I stumbled backward, just barely getting my hands up in time to shield my face from her ferocious fingernails. I nearly dropped my phone, which I somehow managed to hang on to, all while I shoved her away, and with my best outdoor voice commanded, "Evelyn, get off me! Sarah, rein in your sister!" Lo and behold, Evelyn made another desperate lunge at me, but much to my surprise, Sarah actually followed my instructions and wrapped her arms around her sister, pinning her in place. I turned my gaze to Evelyn and hollered, "Get out of here this instant, Oregon! I'm dialing the cops!" I made sure to wave my phone around for added drama. Sarah, ever the peacekeeper, urged both of us to simmer down. She turned to me and said, "Man, she has nowhere to go right now. Plus, Marty snatched her car keys." That explained the mysteriously vacant driveway, but honestly, I couldn't care less. I had reached a full-blown 100% level of fed up with Evelyn, and I was dead set on making sure she got the memo. In a huff, I stormed into my home office, slammed the door shut, and promptly dialed the police. I told them that I'd been assaulted by my fiancé's sister, and I painted a vivid picture of me cowering in my office, my face sporting fresh battle wounds, my vision a blurry mess, and my life hanging by a thread. I even threw in the tidbit that I'd captured the entire brawl on my phone. As I wrapped up my call with the cops, Sarah started knocking on the door, pleading with me to emerge. "Man, please come out. We need to discuss this. Please, I love you. Let's not go through with this," she implored. She added, "Evelyn wants to apologize. Sorry about that last one." I'm pretty sure that last part was pure fiction, but it was abundantly clear that Sarah was on the verge of losing her marbles. I ignored her and brought her attempts to persuade me out of the office to an abrupt halt. That's when, wouldn't you know it, the police arrived at our doorstep. I could hear Sarah conversing with them, which prompted me to finally emerge. I introduced myself to the officers and pointed an accusatory finger at Evelyn, affirming that she had assaulted me and offering to show them the video evidence I had recorded. The younger officer inquired if I wanted to press charges, and I replied with a resounding yes. He repeated the question, and I reaffirmed my desire to press charges once again. At this juncture, both cops exchanged puzzled glances, and I retorted, "Yes, damn it. I want to press charges. I've got video evidence, and this is headed to court. Otherwise, I'll give your boss a ring, by name of course, and request that he swing by personally to handle this mess." I think they were taken aback that I knew their boss's name, though it's not like we're best buds. Given my line of work, I've had my fair share of run-ins with the local law enforcement brass. To be honest, by this time I was getting really angry. While I understand what these guys were thinking, I completely disagree with them. Let's face the facts. I might not be severely injured, but Evelyn assaulted me in my own home, and I wanted her to leave. Thankfully, things didn't immediately escalate, and the two officers handcuffed Evelyn and placed her in the back of their patrol car. She was screaming and crying like a wild, incoherent person the whole time. Sarah wasn't much better. She just kept repeating, "No, please, no," over and over again. At this moment, the younger cop returned and asked if everything was okay here. I simply mentioned I was going to bed. He asked Sarah the same question, and when she didn't respond immediately, he raised his voice and said, "Is everything okay here, ma'am?" It was clear what he was trying to do. At this point, I really disliked this guy, but I held my tongue. Sarah finally realized he was talking to her and nodded in response. Clearly, he wasn't satisfied and began to question her again. That's when I stepped in and said, "If you're looking for trouble, maybe you should search over there on the lawn, where my doorbell camera isn't recording you." I think by now I had pushed this guy's patience too far, but what choice did I have? I believe I was about 30 seconds away from being arrested when his partner intervened and essentially dragged him away. His partner was an older man, probably in his late 50s, and he likely didn't want to deal with processing 2 arrests right at the beginning of his shift, especially when one of them was clearly going to be more trouble than it was worth. I'm pretty sure he talked his partner out of it, and they left, taking Evelyn away, hopefully out of my life forever. Right now, I'm contemplating whether I should continue staying here or not. The fact that my parents live a couple of hours away, combined with the realization of how financially strained I'll be in the short term, ruled out staying at their place or in a hotel. So I simply chose to sleep in the guest room. Sarah made some unsuccessful attempts to engage me in conversation or persuade me to sleep in our bed. However, I politely informed her that we could discuss things tomorrow, as I was tired and needed uninterrupted rest. Fortunately, she respected my wishes, and I fell into a deep sleep, even more profound than I had experienced in years. This brings us up to the latest update. But my dear Reddit friends, let me tell you, the next day turned out to be the most bizarre day of my life, no doubt about it. To begin with, I woke up at 11 a.m. Sarah was still at home, and she had meticulously cleaned the entire house. I mean, the floors were gleaming, and the toilets were immaculate. I could almost taste the freshness of the bathroom linoleum if I licked it. Clearly, she had been busy. When she noticed me, she stayed at a bit of a distance, not quite engaging, but giving off the impression that she had something to say. I understood. Last night was traumatic for everyone, and she was probably uncertain. Did I rashly call off the wedding in the heat of the moment? Was I serious? Was I genuinely angry? I took a deep breath and told her we needed to continue our conversation. She attempted to sit next to me on the couch, and although I considered pushing her away, I refrained from doing so. We might not be getting married, but I saw no need to act as if I hated her, because honestly, I didn't. I was disappointed in her, reasonably disturbed by some of the things I had discovered in her text exchanges with her sister, but we were both going through a tough time, and I didn't want to exacerbate the situation or escalate things to make life even more complicated than it already was. I had to put in some more effort to make Sarah fully understand that the wedding was canceled. She was taking it extremely hard. In fact, that's an understatement. She was completely distraught. There were moments when I thought she might be hyperventilating. I was handling the situation better, but keep in mind that not only was this my decision, but I also had more time to come to terms with it. Eventually, she asked the most important question. What about us? I realize I might face criticism from some people, especially those on Reddit who believe any relationship issue warrants ending it completely. One could even argue that calling off the wedding was like dropping a massive bomb on our 6-year relationship. However, honestly, in that moment, I didn't have an answer for Sarah. I just didn't know, and I told her as much. I explained that I had read all those text messages, and they revealed a side of her that I had never seen before. I admitted that I wasn't sure about her or our relationship anymore. I couldn't fathom why she would support Evelyn in criticizing Marty, encouraging her to cheat on him, and even involving herself in betraying not only him, but their own daughter as well. She kept repeating, I know, it was wrong, I know. I pressed for an explanation, but she couldn't provide one. She simply said she got carried away and felt compelled to support her sister. I told her that, in my view, a good sister is someone who keeps you on the right path and doesn't give you a free pass to be a jerk. She agreed with me and admitted that Evelyn had always been the dominant one when they were kids, and she had often followed her lead. I understood this to some extent. I have an older sibling, too. Although I'm a bit more independent, I also spent the last 18 years with him living on the other side of the planet, except for occasional visits around Thanksgiving or Christmas. Still, maybe I had an advantage over Sarah because my older sibling was a decent person, whereas Evelyn was a terrible influence. Now, here's where I encountered the second major shock in about 48 hours. Sarah expressed her frustration, saying it wasn't fair. I asked, "What's not fair?" She explained that I had been involved in sexting with a girl named Wendy, who she referred to as Bemby, on Instagram last year. She had been hurt but managed to get over it. She questioned why I couldn't do the same in this situation. I was puzzled. Who was this Bemby Wendy? I had absolutely no idea. I inquired if she was joking or perhaps experiencing some kind of breakdown. I must admit that my response wasn't very considerate. But I genuinely hadn't been involved in cybersex or sexting with anyone, especially not some Instagram girl. I'm getting quite vocal at this point, and Sarah is shouting at me through her tears, claiming that she saw the messages last year but chose not to confront me because I had stopped it. Apparently, she had been checking my social media accounts from my home computer while I was at work, which should have been quite boring since I only have family and a couple of work friends on there. I attempt to make my case to her, offering to let her log into all my accounts and check for herself, but she continues to call me a liar and various other hurtful names. She starts throwing objects at me, and things are escalating. I warn her that if she throws one more thing, I'll have her removed from this house, just like her sister. She curses at me and storms off to the master bedroom, slamming the door. At this point, I found myself incredibly confused and hardly knew what to think. I went into my office, powered up my desktop computer, and searched for Bemby Wendy on Google. To my surprise, there was an Instagram account, a Twitter account, a Reddit account, and of course, an OFans page associated with this name. I clicked on one of the Instagram links and saw a post featuring a, very well-endowed woman who seemed to be pushing the limits of science and technology. Oh, and she happened to be from Australia. Now, remember all the nice things I was saying about my brother? Well, guess who was staying with us last Christmas, all the way from Australia? Guess who I told? Sure, go ahead and use my office computer to play games if you have jet lag. As far as I could piece together, my brother, after his wife and kids went to sleep, had logged into either Instagram or OFans or something similar and was likely spending money to engage in explicit conversations with this woman. Quite the revelation about my dear brother, right? I'd really like to call my brother to confirm my suspicions and give him a serious talking to. But it's like 2 or 3 in the morning over there, so I'll have to wait. I'm feeling restless and trying to figure out how I feel about everything. I feel completely disappointed by everyone involved. I find myself thinking, what is this world coming to? For a brief moment, I attempt to connect the dots between whatever Sarah saw my brother do and her actions with Evelyn. But no matter how hard I try, it doesn't quite make sense. Maybe she's a more tolerant or forgiving person than I am, which is why she didn't confront me when she witnessed it. But I wish she had, because it would have given me a chance to explain my stance on these matters and show her how I would handle it. It might have influenced her positively down the line, or maybe it wouldn't have made a difference. I don't know. All I know is that this post is turning into a novel, and I've wasted most of the morning when I should be working, just trying to get this out of my head and onto this page. It feels good to get it off my chest, but there are probably another 2, 3 posts worth of information to share. I won't be posting them to this subreddit anymore. I'm not sure if they'd even allow it. However, I'll quietly update my profile in the next day or 2 with the rest of the story, including my conversations with my brother, my parents, Sarah's parents, and where things stand with Sarah. One thing I can say is that it seems like most of my immediate family relationships are incredibly strained for various reasons. My parents were mostly supportive, but that's changing as the reality of the financial loss sinks in. Yes, the marriage is still off. That was pretty much a given from the start. Sarah's parents are more upset, and I'm sure they're not too pleased with me right now. As for Evelyn, for those wondering, she's no longer in jail. Sarah bailed her out, and I even criticized Sarah for it, calling her her sister's underling. It seemed to strike a nerve with her because she wrote me a lengthy 20-page letter about how her sister always bossed her around during their childhood. I've read it twice now, and I wish we had discussed this at pretty much any point in the last 6 years. Maybe things would be different. I don't know. I apologize for the delay in this update. A lot has happened in the past couple of days that kept me quite busy. It wasn't until today, after lunch, that I finally had some free time to sit down and write this. Firstly, I'm not well informed about Marty's divorce, except that, to my knowledge, it's still in progress. There are no official papers yet, but his intention to divorce is clear. I'm not in a position to advocate for any specific course of action for Marty, offer legal advice, or assist him in any personal actions against the other man or the other man's wife. Marty is an adult, and my role as his friend is to provide support and advice if he seeks it. Secondly, this isn't some kind of sneaky promotion for an OFANS model. If it were, I should have done it in the first post, which reached the front page of Reddit and was seen by over 3 million people. Also, given the popularity of this post on Reddit, it's not surprising that another Redditor, Bambi Wendy, name changed, came across the story and saw her name. It could have been any of the many girls who use Reddit to share their photos. As a quick side note regarding Wendy, I have indeed spoken to her, and she was quite helpful in confirming something for me. As a person, she seems quite nice. However, there are no romantic intentions in the future here. Wendy is happily married for nearly 2 decades, and while her husband may be okay with it, she's a lot to handle for a mere insurance guy like me. Seriously, with that said, let's move on to the update. In my previous message, I left off with the assumption that my brother had used my office computer to chat with Wendy, but it was too late, in his time zone, for me to reach out to him. I'm the kind of person who, once confronted with a problem, feels compelled to actively work on solving it. It's a great trait for my career, but in situations like this, it was driving me crazy. So I decided to take a deep breath, set everything aside for the time being, and focus on what I needed to do. My first task was to contact everyone from my side who had been invited to the wedding but hadn't yet been informed about its cancellation. As you may recall, I had already informed my parents and had them reach out to my relatives on the day I made my decision. However, only Sarah and I had the complete guest list, so I had to handle the rest myself. Out of respect for my friends, I chose to call them instead of sending texts. This may not have been the best idea, as each phone call typically led to a lengthy explanation of why I was canceling the wedding. I could have given some other excuse, but I wanted people to understand that this decision wasn't frivolous, or a result of something trivial like cold feet. It was important, not just for my own reputation, but also to show respect to the people who had agreed to attend and support Sarah and me as a couple on that day. Because of this, it wasn't until late into the evening that I managed to reach everyone, which meant it was already morning in Australia. I knew what I needed to do regarding my brother's situation, but I wanted to ensure that I had all my plans in order. So, I took a break and made myself a sandwich in the kitchen. I noticed that Sarah wasn't at home. I had no idea when she had left. While eating, I contemplated what steps to take regarding my brother's situation. For simplicity's sake, let's refer to my brother as Carl from here on. Now, Carl and I have always had a close relationship, despite the 13-year age gap between us. He played a quasi-parental role in my life because by the time I started forming lasting memories, he was well on his way to adulthood. He generously spent time with his younger brother when most teenagers would have avoided such activities, and he always came across as mature and wise to me as I was growing up. Needless to say, I held him in high regard. The revelation that he had been engaging in sexting with a woman who wasn't his wife, all while in my house, was something I was still trying to come to terms with. I needed to make a decision about how to handle this situation. It was clear that I should talk to him about it, but given the mess my relationship with Sarah was in, I wasn't sure if I cared about making him confess just to clear my own name. Was there even anything left to salvage? For the sake of propriety, I felt the need to at least express my frustration and persuade him to stop. However, I hadn't decided whether I would report him to my sister-in-law. Let's call her Karen, okay? Carl and Karen it is, folks. My decision would depend on what he told me and whether I believed him or not. I finished my meal and logged into Facebook to initiate a video call with Carl. Carl primarily works from home as a remote office worker in the IT field, so he's typically available during the day, and today was no exception. It only rang once or twice before he answered. After exchanging greetings and some pleasantries, I broached the topic directly and asked Carl if he had been using my computer to engage in online explicit chats with women when he was visiting me. Carl's face froze, and he leaned out of the camera frame, obviously closing his office door. "Yeah, I did. Why?" he replied to me. I muttered under my breath and explained to Carl how Sarah had mistakenly thought that his flirting was coming from me since he used my computer. I made it clear that I wasn't pleased about taking the blame for him, and I asked him directly if Karen was aware of his actions. He hesitated for a moment, stumbling over his words, and then appeared somewhat embarrassed. He admitted that Karen didn't know, and he'd prefer to keep it that way. He went on to describe how their relationship had been challenging, particularly in the bedroom since their youngest child was born 4 years ago. Carl had always been a private person, especially regarding intimate matters. Or at least that's how he had always been when talking to his much younger brother like me. However, this time he opened up completely. Things had deteriorated, he was frustrated with constant rejection, Karen was always tired regardless of his efforts or help around the house, and this led to issues on his end, including performance anxiety during the few occasions when Karen was interested in intimacy. It was a vicious cycle, and he eventually resorted to spending time in his office at night under the pretense of working. He even used finger quotes when explaining this. Apparently, his late-night work had evolved into a pretty intense addiction to OFAN sites. Given the relative privacy he had in his office for legitimate work, this spiraled out of control rather rapidly. I asked him if he was still involved in it, and he vehemently denied it. I thought I believed him when he said it. He seemed sincere. However, I had this nagging feeling in the back of my mind that something wasn't right. Perhaps it was due to all the deceit I had recently encountered, but I found myself doubting my own brother, who had always been a reliable and upright guy throughout our lives together. I really disliked being in this situation. Now, the problem I was dealing with was quite complex. First, if I wanted to clear my name, I'd have to persuade my brother to confess to Sarah that he was the one behind it all along. However, if he did that, there was no guarantee that Sarah wouldn't out of spite inform Karen. Personally, I thought it would be best if Karen knew the truth, but at the same time, I wasn't sure if I felt comfortable potentially wrecking my brother's marriage over something he claimed he had stopped, even though it fell into a moral gray area for me. I didn't immediately have a solution to this dilemma, but I did encourage him to be honest with his wife about his actions and to seek marriage counseling. He mentioned that they had been attending counseling for the past 6 months, and while it had been helpful, what had truly made a difference was getting a prescription for generic Viagra. I was so surprised that I accidentally spit out some water, spraying my computer screen. He explained that they had been working on having intimate time at least a couple of times a week, and the Viagra had alleviated his performance anxiety to the point where they were both looking forward to spending time together after their kids went to bed. Essentially, the message was, "Things are finally moving in the right direction, so please don't mess this up for us." I really didn't want to find myself in this situation, not only for the sake of Carl and Karen, but also for my 2 nieces. If what Carl was telling me was accurate, I could potentially disrupt a relationship that was slowly on the mend. The outcome was uncertain, so even though it might disappoint some people, I believed that the best course of action for now was to wait and see. After all, I was going to meet Carl in person in a couple of weeks, and once we were alone in a room with a few drinks in us, I was determined to get to the bottom of this situation. It seemed like the most sensible approach. Anyway, that night I went to bed early. I didn't see Sarah until the following morning, and she looked exhausted as if she hadn't gotten much sleep. Out of habit, I asked her where she had been. We had been together for nearly 6 years after all. She explained that she had gone to the courthouse for Evelyn's arraignment to post bail. The courts closed early on weekends, which is why she had left shortly after I went into my office. After that, she had driven Evelyn to her parents' house and spent the night there. She made a point of telling me how difficult it had been to explain to her parents that I had called off the wedding. I inquired if her parents knew the reason behind it, and she snapped, "Of course they do." I tried to keep my composure, but by this point in the ordeal, I was losing my patience. I retorted, "Are you planning to move back there so that they have both girls at home now?" I admit it was childish and petty, but the fact that she had bailed Evelyn out of jail had infuriated me. "You don't need to be rude about this," she said, and I replied, "And you don't need to be Evelyn's obedient follower." I could see Sarah visibly flinch when I said that. It clearly struck a nerve, and her eyes welled up with tears. I managed to cool my temper, and we stood there, a significant distance apart in our living room, without saying a word for a good minute or two until Sarah decided to speak again. "Our parents are coming over at 3. I face-palmed at this news. I was about to confront her for not consulting me on this, but I realized that would be an ego-driven response. After all, I needed to sit down with them and work out the details of the wedding and any remaining deposits. I also needed to explain face-to-face to everyone why it wasn't happening, so, reluctantly, I agreed to go through with it and get it over with. I attempted to keep myself occupied, but there isn't much to do on a Sunday except pass the time, and it's not very enjoyable when you know you're heading into a difficult situation in just a few hours. Nevertheless, 3 p.m. arrived, along with our parents. We all gathered around the large kitchen table that Sarah had purchased about a month after we closed on the house. It was a second-hand table from Facebook Marketplace, but she adored it because it was made of sturdy oak with a beautiful finish and could seat 8 people, and was just as heavy as it sounds. She always envisioned hosting grand dinner parties with our families, but certainly not like this. The next 3 hours were agonizing. Nobody was happy, and honestly, they shouldn't have been. The most substantial support I received naturally came from my own parents, but even that support was cautious. It was essentially along the lines of, well, it's his decision to make, which more or less meant, yeah, we think this is crazy too, but we're standing by him. Frankly, that was perfectly fine with me. I didn't want my parents to bear the stigma of the canceled wedding by association. I was willing to take responsibility for it. In due course, we reached a reasonable agreement regarding the wedding. We would attempt to recoup whatever funds we could, divide them based on how they were contributed. Some expenses, like the honeymoon, were fully covered by me, while others, like the flowers, were entirely covered by Sarah's parents, and then share the remaining losses collectively. However, when the topic of the house came up, Sarah strongly opposed my suggestion of reimbursing her or her parents for the down payment. Essentially, she had no intention of moving. Now, as you can probably imagine, Sarah and I hadn't really delved into the details of our future together or living arrangements. The mere mention of settling the house equity seemed to catch her off guard, as it implied that I expected her to vacate our home. She reacted strongly, and I don't blame her. I should have first discussed our relationship status with her before attempting to negotiate a payment plan with her parents. It inadvertently revealed my feelings about our relationship to everyone. While I believe our parents anticipated or at least understood this, Sarah was deeply upset. She adamantly refused to accept a breakup over this issue and made her stance clear. "I am not leaving my house, and we are not breaking up," she declared. And that pretty much sums up how my Sunday evening concluded. After our parents departed, Sarah and I attempted to continue the conversation, but we kept going in circles, unable to reach a resolution. To be honest, I was quite exhausted, and I just wanted to quiet my racing thoughts. Surprisingly, we ended up sitting on the couch in silence, watching a movie together until it was time to retire for the night. We left things with a tentative, "We'll discuss it further tomorrow," and retreated to our separate rooms. On Monday morning, I discovered a lengthy handwritten letter from Sarah slid under my door. I glanced at the first few pages and decided to deal with it later before heading off to work. When I left, Sarah was still in bed, indicating that she must have stayed up late writing that letter. At the office, I rescheduled some meetings and started reaching out to venues and vendors on my list. Sarah and her parents were handling the others. The responses were mixed. The catering team insisted that I pay most of their fees, claiming they had ordered most of the food. I argued with them, questioning if they expected me to consume week-old steak, but my protests fell on deaf ears. I attempted to speak with the catering business owner and explain the situation, but it only seemed to reinforce her determination to extract as much money from me as possible. Conversely, the DJ I had hired for entertainment was remarkably understanding and refunded almost all of the money, though it wasn't a significant amount. The day continued in this manner, with me making calls and working, and during breaks, I read Sarah's letter. Now, this spans about 20 pages of written text, so let me provide a summary. Essentially, the core of it is that throughout her life, Sarah has endured bullying from Evelyn. In response, Sarah's way of coping has been to conform to whatever Evelyn desires or wants to hear. She explained that this behavior became a pervasive pattern in her life. She was afraid to disrupt the status quo, cause any issues, and sometimes even voice her own opinions. Reflecting on this, when I scrutinize our relationship more closely, I realize that Sarah might have been an overly accommodating girlfriend. What I mean by that is she never disagreed with me, didn't prioritize her plans over mine, and rarely strongly opposed anything I wanted to do. She consistently went out of her way to present herself as helpful and consistently acted like a yes woman in our relationship. We hadn't even experienced a minor disagreement in our 6-year relationship, let alone a full-blown argument until now. From a relationship perspective, it may sound ideal until it's not. I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah harbors deep-seated insecurities and a strong desire to please others, what's often referred to as people-pleasing behavior. When I start viewing it from this angle, many things begin to make sense, and I realize that despite being with Sarah for 6 years, I don't truly know her. It's as if she's constructed an image around herself that's merely a reflection, mirroring what she believes others want to see. In our relationship, she's been playing the role of the perfect girlfriend, without truly letting me see who she is as an individual. Strangely, I can't even say that what I saw in those text messages represents the real Sarah, because it's almost certainly just another reflection. This time mirroring Evelyn and all her flaws. It may sound peculiar, but it feels like we're in an imbalanced relationship. While she might love me for who I am and my openness, I might have only loved her for the mirror she held up to my own identity. I don't know if this sounds too abstract, but I'm right there with you. It's like this elusive notion I'm trying to grasp but can't quite hold on to. What I can say is that in the past few days, I've probably learned more about Sarah than I did in the entire 6 years we've been together, and her letter offered me the first genuine glimpse into her childhood. That night, we delved further into this topic, her childhood and her behavior. We concluded that she requires assistance. She's an adult who's unfortunately trapped in a childlike fear of disappointing others, whether it's facing her sister's anger, her parents' disapproval, or the possibility of losing love from those she cares about. This isn't a healthy way to have a relationship, and I can confidently say that my decision to cancel the wedding was the right one. It couldn't have been more correct. After our discussion that night, I went to bed with considerably less anxiety than I'd had in the past few days. So this brings me up to our most recent update, and once again, it's quite lengthy. I won't wait 2-3 days to share another one, or I'll keep falling behind. For those who have been wondering, the situation with my brother is more or less resolved, and I'll address that tomorrow. However, the situation between Sarah and me is still somewhat uncertain, but there's a semblance of a plan moving forward. I promise to get to it as soon as I can, but you can imagine there's a lot to cover, and I can only write so much at a time. Recounting the disaster that is my life became incredibly unappealing. However, the wedding date has now passed, and I'm on vacation with my siblings and my brother's family. I'm beginning to feel like most of this is behind me, so let's move on to the updates. Firstly, addressing what seems to really bother people, my brother and his wife are doing well. As I mentioned in my last post, I encourage my brother to confess to Karen about his online interactions with the Australian OFans girl known as Bemby Wendy, who, by the way, is a genuinely nice person. In my last update, I hinted that I had received confirmation from Wendy to support my brother's story. According to her, the timelines matched up, and his OFans account no longer exists. Now, it's possible she could be lying to protect a customer, but I don't think that's the case, and she appeared sincere. My brother, on his part, did tell his wife what had happened during one of their marriage counseling sessions. According to him, she took it quite well and considers it water under the bridge. Last week, I talked to her privately and asked if she was genuinely okay with it. She told me, paraphrasing a bit, "OP, we're not as prudish as you might think. We both watch X movies, and that's essentially how I view this situation. It's not like he was going to have an affair with her." I asked her if she'd feel the same way if he had visited a legal S worker, which is allowed where they live. And she said no. She wouldn't. But he didn't. So that's their clear line. It's different from mine and some vocal Reddit opinions, but judging by the sounds coming from their hotel room last night, they're doing just fine, and their dead bedroom situation appears to be fully resolved. To be honest, these two are making the most of their time. They switched hotel rooms with my sister, who's taking Sarah's place, and now the kids are with her. They even have 2 babysitters eager to take care of the kids while they enjoy some private time. You can guess what they're up to, but let's not get into details. In retrospect, I believe I made the right choice in giving my brother the space to rectify the situation on his own, despite the pressure I faced from others. I strongly argue that comparing the situation with my brother and the situation with Evelyn is like comparing night and day. I disagree that engaging in online intimacy with a professional S-worker is anywhere near as serious as carrying on a full-blown affair. Moreover, my response to the situation is significantly different from how Sarah handled her affair with Marty. As I mentioned in my previous post, she not only concealed the affair from Marty, but also participated in demeaning discussions about him and made other remarks that I won't detail here for various reasons. To put it simply, I'm content with my choice, and those who disagree with me can have their own opinions. Moving on, let's talk about the wedding itself. There isn't much to say here. Sarah, our families, and I incurred substantial losses, but we anticipated that. I negotiated with the caterer, who claimed to have ordered all that food, and she ultimately agreed to give us a larger refund or the food itself. We opted for the latter, which seems fair. We now have a significant amount of frozen steak, chicken, and fish, which was delivered to my parents' house, and they are distributing it to interested parties. Additionally, some wedding gifts from distant relatives arrived and are at my house until we can return them. In the end, the wedding date passed, and for the sake of our sanity, Sarah and I chose to spend it apart. Regarding Marty and Evelyn's situation, I don't believe it will be resolved anytime soon. Marty is determined to divorce Evelyn, but she's making it challenging by pleading with him to reconsider. Moreover, with the start of the school year, Marty will return to teaching and won't be able to care for their daughter every day, which is taking a toll on him as he found solace in spending time with his parents and child. Surprisingly, despite the circumstances, Marty hasn't caused trouble for Evelyn at work, even though he could potentially have both of them fired since it became evident that they used work trips for their extramarital activities. He also hasn't informed Jake's wife about the affair, a decision I strongly disagree with. When I asked him about it, he simply said he's in no rush. He possesses text messages, photos from the pub, and a video from when he entered the house, giving him the power to expose Jake whenever he chooses. Perhaps Marty is finding satisfaction in making Jake anxious, or is helping Evelyn realize her place as the other woman in a married man's life. I'm not entirely sure, but this situation has undoubtedly changed Marty, and I can't blame him for it. Everything I know about Evelyn comes from Sarah, but as far as I understand it, she's mainly going to work and then returning straight to her parents' house, almost like a teenager with a curfew. It's clear that her parents are not pleased with either of their daughters right now. Strangely, despite the very public implosion of our wedding, it seems to be overshadowed by the constant drama of Evelyn's impending divorce. They appear to have shifted their focus from Sarah after realizing that Marty was genuinely taking steps to divorce Evelyn and secure access to their granddaughter. Understandably, their anger towards Evelyn is compounded by the fact that their time with their grandchild will be significantly reduced. Now let's talk about Sarah and me. Firstly, I don't believe this update will make anyone particularly happy, whether it's those who advised me to end the relationship or those who urged me to treat her with compassion due to her evident mental issues. The reality is that apart from the lying and hiding of the affair, what disturbed me the most was the way she interacted with her sister in those text messages. While some might better understand my perspective if I shared the messages, I refuse to do so and don't want to engage in arguments over their content. To put it simply, it made me reassess Sarah's character. That's where I stand today, still assessing. I should clarify that we are no longer together in the way we were as an engaged couple, but we haven't completely closed the door on the relationship either. I've gained a better understanding of Sarah's personality and can differentiate between her genuine self and the facade she created to please people, including her sister. This behavior, known as people-pleasing, makes more sense to me now, especially after hearing numerous examples from her family. It's also encouraging that she is actively seeking help for it. Despite finding her behavior extremely unsettling, I credit her for how she handled the situation when I found her and Evelyn on our couch that night. She didn't lie, minimize, or avoid accountability, even though she didn't know that I had seen her text messages with Evelyn. She was truthful with me, even when it would have made her look bad. That counts for a lot in my book, which is why I'm considering changing the chapter rather than closing it. To be clear, this isn't a victory for the forgive her and blame everything on the sister crowd. I haven't forgiven her, and our situation has evolved. She has moved back to her old room at her parents' house, similar to Evelyn, although Sarah plans to leave in a couple of weeks because she believes the environment is detrimental to her mental health and her efforts to seek help. We are definitely not together at the moment. Sarah initially resisted this decision, and while I can understand her perspective and sympathize with it, I believe that if she indeed has the emotional problems that appear to be the case, then pressing the issue may motivate her to seek the necessary help. Just forgiving her would mean sweeping everything under the rug, which would ultimately be detrimental to our relationship. I wish she had opened up to me sooner, allowing me to address the problem as a supportive partner. Still, this is the best approach I can take now. So, my current situation can be summed up as wait and see when it comes to Sarah. Perhaps one or both of us will eventually decide to call it quits and move on completely. It could very well be me, but I have no desire to complicate my life further by getting involved with another woman at this point. Therefore, I believe we're looking at several months down the line before we reach a definitive resolution on this matter, and I'm fine with that. Not everything needs to progress at an emotionally charged, rapid pace. If, at any point, I believe that Sarah's issues are insurmountable or that rebuilding trust is impossible, I won't hesitate to walk away. I'm not interested in prolonging a situation that I see as hopeless. In essence, I don't think it's hopeless. I simply recognize that it will be challenging. I'm open to waiting a bit to see how it all plays out. I'm even seeking my own counselor to help me process the events of the past few weeks and understand how Sarah and I interacted with each other. I genuinely believe that while I may have been fooled by her, I played a part in that deception because who wouldn't appreciate a girlfriend who never disagrees, always aligns her plans with mine, and goes out of her way to ensure my happiness before her own. The struggle, both for me and perhaps for Sarah, lies in distinguishing between her genuine love for me and her deeply ingrained need to please others, born out of fear of rejection and anxiety. In the end, when we find answers to these questions, we'll know the fate of Sarah and my relationship. I understand this update may not be what everyone expected, but it's all I have to offer. Feel free to check back in a few months to see how things have unfolded.